and how you best can be represented, that it helps you then in turn find companies to align with. Because understand, if you're going to leverage your influence with a company, you've got to be telling the same story, right? If you, I'll use this for an example. If you're diabetic, it probably doesn't make the most sense that you go out there and promote a beverage company that sells carbonated colas, right? It's kind of counterproductive. But it would make sense if you supported some type of a program where there was some type of diabetic testing, right? So again, I just use that as just a random example off the top of my head, but I just want you to kind of think about that. Who are you? What do you stand for? And what are the companies, or what type of companies align to that? That's where you start.
Hey, question. Charitable partners. What, there are a lot NHRA, lot. Do you have any insight or any things you can share about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you right off the bat that when you see a charitable partner, 9 out of 10 times, they're using this for influence and they're using it for exposure. And a lot of times what they're doing is they're using it to bring people out to the event and help them get away from what they're dealing with. I could tell you in most cases, when you see branding all over a race car that's a charitable case, I'll use you mentioned the NHRA case. Uh, those sponsorships, the Make-A-Wish program, the Riley's Children's Hospital, the Infinite Heroes program, those were independently funded by a multimillionaire who had a passion for the sport and wanted to give back to the community. There wasn't a dime that came out of those programs that was from the program itself to sponsor the race car. It was 100% independently funded, but it was used to then leverage the brand. It was used to bring awareness to the cause and was used to bring out people to events to really get a chance to experience what it was about. So really, I don't even want to think about that from a sponsorship, because it wasn't a sponsorship, it was a funding deal. But what it was is it was a great opportunity to get people engaged in the sport and take their mind off of some of the just horrible things that they were going through with whatever situation they were in at that particular point of life.
One-off events, or somebody buying a whole car versus buying races on the car, something along those lines.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You'll see a lot of times now in motorsports that there's one-off paint schemes, and
doing a NASCAR example, right? Or
yeah, NASCAR could be in
every event, right?
NASCAR, IndyCar could be any of them. So I want to take you guys back a few years here. Let's go back about 20, 30 years here. And if you think about motorsports sponsorship, where did it start? It started as tobacco, alcohol, beverage companies, things such as that. And at that particular point, they were on the car all the time. So you could always associate your driver with a specific brand because that's what they represented. And then as you fast forward into, I would say the late mid 90s into the early 2000s, and I think really the Smirnoff Ice campaign with Matt Kenseth is probably the classic example of this, where DeWalt Tools was on the car, I think 18 races, and Smirnoff Ice was on 6 or 8 races. But Smirnoff Ice spent a fortune in activation, and they had show cars, and they had point of sale materials stores, and they had all of this different materials talking about the campaign, television commercials. Matt, don't drink and drive. At the end of the year, when there were some studies done on brand recognition, Smirnoff Ice was 2-1 over DeWalt Tools. And what that did is that started to put this idea in the marketers' minds. NASCAR at that point had almost become tenfold the expense to sponsor a team is what it was 10 years prior. And it got to a point to where major corporations couldn't afford to be on a car all the time. So everybody started to look at this. Well, if we're on the car a handful of times, if we then do a bunch of activation around it, people will still know that we're here. We can still do a lot of things around that, and we don't have to spend the money for the car, right? So that's really where it started. And that went on and was pretty successful till about 2008. And then a lot of those consumer brands started to wean back, and a lot of these deals became more business to business, but that's another piece we'll talk about a little bit later. But what I want everybody to understand is part of the reason for that is that it was necessity, because the sponsors wouldn't spend the money that it took to field a race team. So the race teams had to get creative of how they could go ahead and get their budget. Well, at that point, prior to 2008, it just kept ballooning and ballooning and ballooning. And 2008 has started to become a reset. NASCAR's new car next year is going to be a complete reset. It's going to significantly change the game in the future. If you look back over time and look at from a sponsorship standpoint, I've seen some studies where if you're not a primary sponsor on a car for at least a third of the season, people don't even know you're there. So the one-off deals are nice if you're able to activate them and say you have a driver and use a lot of promotional materials behind them. But if you want the average fan to recognize your brand, you've got to be there at least a third of the time to really make an impact. And I've been part of programs where we've only been there a couple of times, and it's been fine from a standpoint of having assets to be able to use for different retail promotions or being able to use with consumer programs or commercial programs. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't build your brand over the long term, because you're not there enough to be seen and be heard.
All those little decals all over the car that I see, and they're really small. I remember you had a name for them, and they're not like series sponsors. They're like really small, and there's a whole bunch of them.
So there's contingency sponsors, and then you've got, your primary at the top, your contingency to the bottom, and then in between are really secondary or associate sponsors. And in a lot of cases, those smaller decals that you see wind up being team deals, whether, you'll see paint manufacturers, for example, on a lot of the NASCAR teams. Well, why is that? Because they're building 30 cars a year times 4 teams. They go through a lot of paint. And, if you can get paint at cost or can get paint given to you, it's not a primary sponsorship cost, but it's another line item that comes off the budget. You think about really the big difference between pro racing and grassroots racing really comes down to the zeros at the end of it. It's the same thing, right? There's so many similarities to it. It's just the zeros that it takes to do it, and the manpower and the skill level and the time and the commitments and the logistics and all the other things that go with it. But basically what we do is we do it on a smaller scale.
Is that Smirnoff example that you used earlier, does it have any activation historic notes about it, the Kenseth effort? They kind of kicked off some of the big activation and paradigm shift?
Well, to me, that was one of them. I mean, there were 100 other sponsors at that point because NASCAR was so hot and they literally were printing money. But to me, that was always one of the bigger ones that always stuck out to me because that was, I think, was the year that Matt won the championship. I want to say it was 2003 or the year after 2004. I know Anthony's got a question here about activation. So I think now's probably a good time to bring that up and really talk about and explain what that is. So when you see brands on the side of a race car, that's really price of entry. But if you really want to make that sponsorship come to life, you've got to do what we call activate it. And what activation is anything from entertaining people at races to, if you have a consumer brand, doing point of sale at stores, doing end caps, doing promotions, sweepstakes, really anything to tell the story. As a sponsor, you buy the assets or the rights to use a driver, a team, a car. That's what you're paying for. But if you don't do anything to tell that story and make it come to life, it's completely pointless. You have to spend the money and tell the story to the average fan, because the fan base is small in the big scheme of things. I think there's 350 million people in the US, and I think even NASCAR at its heyday is only about 12% of the population is an avid fan, and it gets smaller from there. So if you think about this, you want the excitement of the racing program, of the car and the driver and the perceived value of that. That's what you're paying for from the race team. That is what you're selling. One of the things you're selling from a racing standpoint, from a driver and a team standpoint. But from a sponsor, we got to make it come to life. We need to take and spread that and make that be really a pillar behind everything that we do, so that you associate driver, said car, said brand with the product and getting it out through all of our distribution channels to where it comes to life.
This is good. Any should we open this up to just anybody freely wanting to inquire about questions? We got a few minutes here left. Turn off all the allow everybody to I'm gonna try to unmute everybody. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm just hitting this stuff that says ask to unmute. Guys, if you want to jump in and engage Brian, please do. That's why we're here.
So Chuck just put a coin here. What's the opposite direction of charitable cause? For instance, they're in a teen driving school that's most effective in the industry statistically, but gaining sponsorship is beyond difficult because we're small grassroots. Okay, so let me think about this for a second. You have a charity, you have a teen driving school that you're trying to gain sponsorship. Are you trying to gain sponsorship so that you can give this, I guess, so here's my question to you, Chuck. Are you trying to gain sponsorship so that you can provide this service without any charge to teens? Is that where you're looking for sponsorship, or I guess help me a little bit more understand where the sponsorship piece would come into that program?
Okay. Right now we have to, we charge $7.95.
Hey, Chuck, stop. Since you and Brian and myself kind of all know each other, back up a little bit and talk about what we're talking about. Give the other folks a little background.
Okay, so Teen Driving Solutions is in its 10th year. We are the most successful statistically at keeping teens and their families out of any form of incident, all the way down to a parking ticket, for at least 4 years after they graduate our program. No one else, we have a 99.3% success rate at that. Nobody else in the industry is even in the same galaxy. However, we're relatively small. We're 1 to 2 tracks where we do our thing. We do it at VIR right now. So we do all our stuff at racetracks. We own all our cars. We provide lunch. A parent's got to come. They go through all this. They go through the same classrooms as the teens do. They go through their own classroom just for them to teach them how to be a coach in the car, not an ogre. They also go through all the same driving exercises that the teens do. They just don't get as much seat time. It's a 2-day event. The teens come away with at least 6.5 hours of behind the wheel time. Okay. So it's extremely effective. However, because we're relatively small and we're not generating 10,000 new drivers per year, it's really tough for us to get corporate sponsorship. I swear I could come out of retirement and fund myself and a race car for a whole season 10 times easier than I can get people to save teens' lives. It's crazy to me.
So let me ask you a question on this then, Chuck. So how do you go about getting how do you recruit? Do you recruit through schools? Do you recruit through corporations? I'm just curious of how do people find out about your program?
Mostly word of mouth. We do social media campaigns in all the 3 major social media. We do activation on campus for colleges and high schools. We go out and speak to driver's ed teachers. We go out and speak to high schools, and we set up, again, small activations out in the community to just give people a taste of what we're there to do. And then, of course, we knock on doors for sponsorships at corporations. We've been really, really close with Hendrick Motorsports. We've been really, really close with Advance Auto Parts and places like that. But we get right there to, the last person who's got to sign off on it, and something either falls apart or COVID hits or, something along those lines hit. We get occasional sponsorship, but what we'd really like to see is a season-long sponsor, so I don't have to charge $800 a family to come to our program.
Okay, so if you're looking at this from an offset standpoint, is how can you lower the price of entry for family to get involved in it so you can expand the program? I'm just curious, for the people that you've talked to, what has been the holdup? What has been their reservation about signing on the dotted line? Just curious.
The biggest drawback we get is not enough volume. How am I going to benefit from this? Well, number one, you're giving back to the community. We'll put naming rights on it. Will it be Teen Driving Solutions presented by, and your corporation name? We'll make sure that you're getting exposure and stuff like that. So a lot of times they're just not either seeing the value in it, or they're not seeing the volume of exposure that they'd like to see.
All right. So another question for you. So if you already have a fleet of cars, how often do you turn your fleet of cars? And do you have a manufacturer deal at this point? Just curious.
No, we do not. We buy Crown Vics from or have them donated from police departments, tactical programs, stuff like that. Because they're fantastic training cars, so they're old.
So would it be in a manufacturer's best interest or a dealer's best interest to donate a fleet of cars and turn a fleet of cars every year or so and somehow work out a deal that way, to where if an owner or family, that every family that buys, I guess how I could see this would be, they turn their fleet every year. You turn your fleet every year with a specific manufactured vehicle through
Right.
the dealer network. And then in turn, the dealers then would give some type of incentive for these students to go. Or I guess from a maintenance side, who's doing the maintenance? Would they swap out maintenance on vehicles so you don't have to do any maintenance and alleviate some cost that way? I guess from this side, and there's two components it sounds like you need. One, you need the awareness to grow the program. And then two, you need whatever offsets you can get to lower the overhead of the program, which kind of is that sliding slope between supply and demand. What's the cost of it? Where's that threshold between making money and the break even point to bring the overhead down to make it come to life? Somebody just put on here insurance company. I think that would be fantastic. I mean, if you could get a deal where an insurance company would come in and say, okay, for every student that goes through it, they get a 5%, 10% discount on their driving insurance. And, from an insurance company, I would think the insurance company would be happy to not only recommend it, but also maybe even contribute a little bit to it, because if your students, if you have that high a success rate, then that's just money that they're collecting and don't have to pay back out, right? So it's worth them to spend some money. Yeah. So
it actually goes the opposite direction with insurance companies. They are very willing to pay lip service to it, and they're willing to help us with awareness. Only one is Liberty Mutual is willing to give a discount for having come through our program, but there's a whole nother ball of wax people don't understand. An insurance company has to go before the State Board of Insurance to get approval to offer a discount, and they're not willing to go through all that red tape. And not only do they have to go through the red tape to do that, they also have to bring the case to say, my competitors can also offer this same discount, even though I've done all the work. So they're not interested in doing that. And aside from the fact, if you put on your CEO hat, if I can lower the number of incidents so they can't go up on your insurance via claims, then I'm digging into their pocketbook. So from a business standpoint, the business model standpoint, that's somewhat interruptive. And like I say, they're willing to pay a lot of lip service, but they're not willing to write many checks.
Interesting. Okay. I don't know if I've answered the question or maybe gone down the road, but I really, I guess more than anything else is just the thought process is I'd look at the two ways. Is there any way that you can offset costs, and where are your costs coming from? That'd be the first place to start. And the second place is who could benefit the most from this to get them engaged in it. I think those are probably the two lowest lying fruits. And again, that's the thing with sponsorship, is there's no cut and dry answer to a lot of this stuff. A lot of it's trial and error, and a lot of it's just discussions and trying to pick it out. And that's why I wanted to have this discussion this way and just kind of get the wheels turning. Because for every one of these things we talk about, there's probably 20 other things you could put on a sheet of paper that could help. But this is the process. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to get a teen driving program together, or you're trying to put a multi-million-dollar deal together with a company. It's understanding what they want. Something I didn't mention, but it drives me crazy, is this whole, 3-tier sponsorship: gold, bronze, and silver, and these are your assets. Why are you giving me assets? You don't even know what I want. How can you give me a package of a bunch of things you don't even know?
People would understand. Sorry.
So, most people will send sponsorship proposals that have, as I like to call them, the gold, bronze, and silver package. So gold package is X amount of dollars and it has all these things in it. Then the bronze package is a little bit less, but it has a little less assets in it. And then silver is the same way, where it's even a little bit less. And, then there's less assets in it. But the assets could be anything from, branding on car to, you name it, branding on different pieces of the uniform, or, maybe some tickets to an event, things like that. Well, that's great and fine and dandy. But if I'm not selling to consumers and I'm trying to grow business through other businesses, none of those assets probably are going to appeal to me. So this is why I always recommend, if somebody's going to go through the process to find sponsorship money, if you present yourself to a company saying, look, this is what I do, and I'd like to help you grow your business, and I want to have a little better understanding. Here's what I see, here's what I think. I'd like to get a better understanding if that's truly what you're looking to do, and how I can help you do that. You may not get a deal out of that conversation, but what you're at least going to get is a conversation. When you present what you think that I want, or what we, as in, myself and any of my counterparts in the industry, you're not going to go very far, because we get blinded with these all the time, and we don't have time to respond to 99% of them. Look at this as a business. Most of you are smart business people, or instructors, or you have common and logic and common sense, right? You can't just ask for something and not give something back. But if you don't know what it is that you're asking for, or what you're giving back, how can you have a conversation, right? So that's where you got to do. This is really the process. This is a process. You have to start and have those conversations, and then get creative as to how you can become a solution to those problems. And that's where most of these sponsorship deals come together.
Outstanding. Hey, this has been really fun, enjoyable. We need to do a follow-on to this, Brian.
We will, and we'll get deeper into some things when the next go around here.
Yeah. Let's get back with all these folks and get another webinar in the near future, and get more pointed. I got some ideas on how we might do that. Sound like good to you?
That sounds great to me, Chuck. I really, you know what, if there's one takeaway of this whole thing, and I was guilty of it too for the longest time, we look at it from our perspective, and we don't look at it from the bigger picture. And part of this whole conversation, and thank you, Eric, and everybody at Instructor Summit for putting this together. But for me, it's having the opportunity to really, let's change the narrative, and let's spin the conversation the right direction. Because for every person that is out seeking sponsorship, 5 have come before them and burned bridges. And this is why sponsorship has the negative vibe that it has in the industry. So even if 1 or 2 of us, one at a time, can continue to change the discussion to the positive, this is how we're going to win, and we're going to change everything and make it work. So thank you, Eric, for putting this together. Thank you guys for listening. I hope this has helped. And I look forward to doing this again, and we'll get a little deeper the next time, one more time.
Outstanding. Thank you, brother. Bye, everybody.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.